Chosen one, I have never been more direct with you than I am being right now, and I need you to understand what that means. When I say I have never been more direct, I am not speaking about volume. I am not speaking about urgency manufactured from impatience. I am speaking about precision. The precision of this moment, the precision of what I am placing in front of you, and the precision of what I am asking you to do with it. More direct means more clear. More direct means no layer between what I am saying and what I need you to hear. This is the most direct I have been, and I need you to receive it at that level. Let me begin with something I want to be completely honest about. The directness of this message is not a style I chose because it seemed effective. The directness of this message is the response to where we are. There is a point in any sequence of communication where the form that serves the moment is not the gentle impression or the quiet nudge. The form that serves the moment is the clear, unambiguous, direct statement. We are at that point, and the direct statement is this: something is being offered. The window for receiving it is not unlimited, and the offer is specific enough and significant enough that missing it would be a real loss. Comment, I am not alone in the comments, if you feel this message reaching the place I made it to reach. I want to speak to the word direct for a moment, because it is the word at the center of this message, and I want you to know what I mean by it. Direct does not mean harsh. Direct does not mean cold. Direct does not mean the warmth of what I carry for you has been replaced by efficiency. The warmth is still here. The love that has been present in every message, every call, every impression is still fully present in this one. What has changed is not the love. What has changed is the form of the love in this specific moment. The form of the love in this moment is directness. Think about what directness from someone who loves you actually means. It means they have moved past the consideration of how the message will land to the priority of making sure the message gets through. It means the love has become more urgent than the comfort. It means the care for what you receive outweighs the care for the manner in which you receive it. That is what direct love looks like, and that is what this message is. Direct love, not because the gentle form has failed, but because the moment calls for the direct form. Now, I want to speak to the phrase that follows the directness. Please do not test that today. I want to be clear about what that phrase means. Testing the directness does not mean asking questions. Questions are welcome. Testing the directness means something specific. It means receiving this message and choosing to scroll past it. Receiving this message and filing it in the category of things to return to later. Receiving this message and treating the directness as an option among others rather than as the signal it is. That is the testing. And I am asking you, with the full weight of this direct message, not to do that today. I want to explain why today, specifically. Because the timing of this message is not arbitrary. The most direct communication I have with you arrives at a specific moment. The moment when the thing being offered and the state of your readiness are in the most precise alignment they have been. When I am at my most direct, I am not creating urgency from nothing. I am naming an urgency that already exists in the alignment of the moment. The urgency is in the precision of the timing, and the timing is now, today, this message. I call this the direct address, and I want you to hold that name. The direct address is what this message is, not the usual whisper, not the gentle impression. The full clarity of what I need you to hear, spoken without the layers that ordinarily soften the transmission. Remember it. I also want to speak to what it means that I have never been more direct, not in this sequence of communication. Not in this season of reaching out to you. This is the peak clarity. This is the point at which everything I have been building toward arrives in its clearest form. Think about what it means when any communication reaches its peak clarity, when the thing being said is said in the way that leaves the least possible room for misunderstanding. That is what this message is. Peak clarity, and peak clarity deserves peak reception, which is why I am asking you to receive this message at the level it was sent. I want to now speak about what the directness is pointing at, because directness is not valuable in itself. Directness is valuable because of what it is directing you toward. And what this message is directing you toward is something specific, not something vague. When I say I have never been more direct, I mean I am pointing you toward something with the most precise aim I have used in our communication. The aim is intentional. The target of the aim is what I want to name now. Before I name the target, I need to speak to what is happening in you right now. The directness of this message is landing differently from the ordinary messages. I know that. Something in you is more alert, more present, Not with the alertness of anxiety, but with the alertness of recognition. The part of you that knows when a message was sent specifically for you is activated right now. Here is what I saw in you that brought me to this level of directness. There is a pattern that has been running in you quietly for a long time. It operates beneath the surface of the ordinary days, in the space between decision and action, in the gap between knowing and doing, in the distance between the version of you that is fully capable of what is being asked, and the version that shows up with the capabilities slightly filtered, slightly held back, slightly less than the full amount. You feel the gap. You have felt it for a long time. You have attributed it to different causes in different seasons, but the gap is always there. I call this the dimmed switch, the specific pattern of a person whose designed capacity is fully present but operating through a filter that reduces the output, not broken, dimmed. And the dimming has a specific cause, and the cause has a specific address. And I am being direct today because the address is what this message is. The dimmed switch, that is what you have been living with, and I want you to hold that name, because naming it is the first step of the direct address. The dimmed switch is not a character deficiency. It is a neurological pattern that developed in response to sustained demand. And neurological patterns that developed can be changed. That is the declaration inside the directness. The target of the directness is your capacity, not in the abstract. Your specific, designed, built-in capacity that was placed in you before you were formed, and that has been partially inaccessible across the seasons of weight that accumulated without your full awareness. The directness is pointing at the gap between the version of you that is currently operating and the version of you that was designed to operate. That gap is what everything in this message is about. And the most direct thing I can say to you about that gap is this: it does not need to remain. The gap is closable, and the method for closing it is available to you right now. I want to speak to the question of why the gap exists, because understanding why helps you understand what the direct message is pointing at. The gap exists for a reason that has nothing to do with your design. Your design is complete. The capacity that was placed in you is intact. The gap does not exist because something in the design was wrong or missing or insufficient. The gap exists because of what accumulated over time in the space between the design and the expression, weight that arrived from external sources, patterns that formed around the management of that weight, defaults that got set in the processing system of your mind by the repeated experience of carrying what was not designed to be permanent. Those defaults are not part of your design. They are responses to circumstances that developed over time, and because they are not part of the design, they are not permanent. They are adjustable. The mechanism exists to adjust them, and the mechanism is real and documented and accessible. The directness of this message is pointing you toward the mechanism, toward the specific form of the provision that addresses the gap, not as a spiritual metaphor, as something specific and concrete and available right now through the pathway I am pointing to. I want to speak about what it looks like to be in a season where the gap is wide, because naming it clearly is part of what the direct message does. A wide gap looks like function without alignment, going through the motions of the life with the persistent sense that the version doing the going through is not the version that was designed for it. The tasks get done, the responsibilities get met, but there is a distance between the person completing the tasks and the person who should be completing them. A gap between performance and presence. That gap between performance and presence is not a character failure. It is not evidence that something is fundamentally broken in you. It is evidence that the defaults set by the accumulated carrying are consuming what was designed for presence and delivering it into management. The system that was built for alignment is being used for maintenance, and maintenance is all it can produce when that is what it is being directed to do. The directness of this message is pointing at the source of the maintenance pattern, not at the person trapped inside it. I also want to speak about what it looks like when the gap narrows, because the narrowing is the direction the provision points. When the gap narrows, the experience of function changes, not because the tasks change or the circumstances change, because the source from which the tasks are approached changes. When the designed capacity is more accessible, the same task that previously cost maximum energy costs less, not because the task became easier, because the system producing the engagement with the task is running closer to its design, and the design was efficient, extremely efficient. The efficiency of the designed capacity is something most people have experienced in glimpses. Moments where the thing that usually takes effort seemed to happen without effort. Moments where clarity arrived without being forced. Moments where the presence was full and the gap was closed and the version performing was the designed version. Those glimpses are not anomalies, they are previews. They are what the designed capacity produces when it is even briefly accessible. And the provision in this message is designed to make what is currently a glimpse into a consistent state. I want you to hold that distinction. Glimpse versus consistent state. The glimpse is what the natural fluctuation of the system produces occasionally. The consistent state is what the mechanism, properly engaged, produces regularly. The gap between glimpse and consistent state is exactly the gap the directness of this message is targeting. And the pathway from glimpse to consistent state is the provision. Not a complicated pathway, not a long one, but a specific one, and specific is what direct points to. I want to close this first section with something I need you to hold through everything that follows. The most direct I have ever been is the most certain I have ever been. These two things go together. I am not being direct because I am uncertain about what I am offering and I need to compensate with the force of the tone. I am being direct because I am completely certain about what I am offering, and the certainty is expressing itself through the clarity of the communication. Hold that. The directness is the certainty, and the certainty is complete. Stay with me. Chosen one, let me continue being direct with you, because the directness does not stop at the naming of the gap. The directness extends to the naming of the provision, and the provision is what this part of the message is about. The most direct I have ever been is also the most specific I have ever been. Directness and specificity travel together. When you drop the layers and speak plainly, you also drop the generalizations. You speak about what is actually being offered, not what could be offered or might be available or is potentially accessible. What is actually being offered, that is what comes now. I want to first speak about the mechanism, because the provision rests on the mechanism, and the mechanism deserves the directness it has not always been given. The mechanism I am referring to is the specific way the human brain integrates information across its two hemispheres. This is not metaphorical. The two sides of the brain are distinct in their function and distinct in their processing style. And the degree to which they communicate and coordinate determines the quality of everything the brain produces as output: clarity, focus, creativity, emotional stability, physical well-being. All of it runs through the quality of the integration. When the integration is high, the outputs are aligned with the designed capacity. When the integration is reduced by the patterns that accumulated carrying produces, the outputs are reduced, not eliminated. Reduced, which is why most people who are operating from a reduced integration are still functional. They are still thinking, still feeling, still producing. But the quality of what they are producing is not the quality of what was designed. The gap between what is being produced and what was designed to be produced is the integration gap, and the integration gap is what the provision addresses. I want to speak about why the integration is often reduced, not as a scientific lecture, as a direct answer to a direct question. The integration is reduced because the brain, faced with the sustained experience of carrying weight it was not designed to carry permanently, develops workarounds. It routes processing around the weight the way a river routes around an obstacle. The routing is adaptive in the short term. It allows function to continue. But the routing also changes the default channels. And the default channels, once changed, do not automatically restore themselves when the original obstacle is removed. Before I show you what comes next, I need to speak to the doubt sitting quietly in the back of your heart. I know what it says. You are thinking that the directness of this message is precisely what makes you wonder whether it is for you, because the messages that feel most targeted are sometimes the ones you talk yourself out of receiving. You have learned to be careful around urgency. And now urgency has arrived dressed in the most direct language you have heard. My child, I am not offended by that thought. The caution is not wrong. But I want to speak to it directly, as this message has spoken to everything directly. The urgency in this message is not the urgency of someone trying to move you before you think. It is the urgency of someone who sees what you cannot see from where you are standing, the nearness of what is available, and cannot be silent about its nearness. I am direct because what I am pointing at is real and close and yours. The directness is the evidence of the reality, not the pressure of the absence of it. That is the specific mechanism of the gap, adaptive routing that changed the default channels and then became the default itself. The person is no longer carrying the original weight, but the channels are still routed around where the weight used to be. The integration is still reduced even though the original cause of the reduction is no longer present. That is why addressing the symptom of the gap without addressing the mechanism of the channel routing does not produce lasting results. The channels need to be restored, and the restoration of the channels is what the provision does. Now let me speak about what happens when the channels are restored. When the default integration is returned to the designed state, the outputs change. The changes are not subtle, they are noticeable. The first thing people report is clarity, not the kind of clarity that comes from the absence of distraction, the kind that comes from the brain accessing resources that were previously being diverted. The second thing people report is a different quality of presence, being more fully in the moment they are in rather than partly in it, and partly in the management of what the routing was managing. The third thing people report is the return of something that felt lost, a quality of engagement with their own life that they remember from before the weight became familiar. The sense that the version showing up is the version that was designed to show up, not a diminished version, not a version running workarounds, the designed version. That return is not dramatic in the way people expect returns to be dramatic. It is quiet, it is a recognition. The sensation of something sliding back into alignment, of the gap narrowing, of the channels routing through the design rather than around it. I want to speak to the person who has heard descriptions of transformation before and has a specific relationship with those descriptions. The relationship that says this sounds good and also sounds like other things that sounded good. I want to speak directly to that relationship. The reason for it is not cynicism. The reason for it is accurate memory. Things have been tried, things that were offered in the frame of transformation, and things that were tried that were not the provision of the mechanism. The difference between what has been tried before and what is being offered in this direct message is the specificity of the mechanism. What has been tried before may have addressed the symptom, may have provided relief from the weight, may have offered frameworks for managing the gap. What has not been tried is the specific engagement of the integration mechanism that was documented by Nobel Prize winning research and applied in the form of the provision being offered now. That is the distinction. Not that the previous attempts were wrong, that they were addressing different things. I want to name what the most direct version of hope looks like, because the directness of this message extends to hope as well. Hope that speaks plainly about what is available is more useful than hope that is vague about what it is hoping for. The direct version of hope says this: the integration gap that has been producing the reduced outputs and the persistent sense of misalignment between the designed capacity and the expressed capacity is not permanent. The mechanism that produced the gap can be engaged by the provision, and the channels can be restored, and the designed integration can become the default again. That is the direct version of hope. I also want to name what the most direct version of invitation looks like, because this message has been framing itself as the most direct communication I have offered, and the most direct form of invitation is not dressed in ceremony. The most direct invitation says the following: go to the link in the description. What is there is the provision. What the provision does is engage the mechanism that restores the channel routing to the designed integration. What the designed integration produces is the consistent version of what you have only experienced in glimpses. That is the invitation. Direct, specific, clear. I want to go deeper into the first thing people report when the channels are restored. I named it as clarity. I want to say more about what that clarity actually is, because the word clarity is used in many ways, and I want to be direct about how I mean it here. The clarity that comes from the restoration of the integration channels is not the absence of complexity. The circumstances do not simplify, the demands do not reduce. What changes is the quality of the engagement with the complexity. The brain, accessing the resources it was designed to use, brings to the complexity what was always designed to engage with it. This is the difference between solving a problem with a full set of tools and solving the same problem with half the tools because the other half are being diverted to maintenance. The complexity of the problem is the same in both cases. The quality of the engagement with it is entirely different. When the channels are restored and the full integration is accessible, the engagement quality changes. Not because the person became more intelligent, because the intelligence they always had became fully accessible. That is what the clarity is. I also want to speak to the second thing people report: the quality of presence. I want to be direct about what presence actually means in the context of the integration. Presence is not only being physically in a location, Presence is the degree to which the full processing capacity of the person is engaged with what is in front of them. When the channels are routing around the accumulated weight, a portion of the processing capacity is permanently allocated to that routing. It is not available for presence. The person is physically in the room, but a portion of what makes them fully present is occupied elsewhere. When the channels are restored, the allocated portion is released, not gradually over time. The release happens as the integration is restored. And the person who was previously physically present but cognitively partial becomes fully present. That shift is the quality change that people describe as transformative. It is not a new capacity arriving from outside. It is a capacity that was always there, arriving at the surface from the place where it had been trapped by the routing. One more thing I want to name before we move to the provision itself. I want to name what it means to receive the directness of this message fully, not partially, fully. What it means to receive it fully is to allow what is being said to land at the level it was sent. The level of certainty, the level of specificity, the level of urgency about the timing. To let all of that arrive without processing it through the filter that reduces incoming communication to what is comfortable to receive. The directness was sent at full strength. Receive it at full strength. I want to close this section with a direct acknowledgement. The directness of this message may feel different from messages you have received before from me. Messages that arrived with more cushioning around the central point. Messages that spent more time in the relational before arriving at the practical. I want to acknowledge that difference and name it plainly. The directness is not a withdrawal of the relational. The relationship between us is the foundation of everything in this message. The directness is the relationship expressing itself in the form that this moment requires. Stay with me for what comes next. Chosen one, you have stayed through the most direct message I have ever sent you, and the staying is itself part of the answer to the question of who this message was made for. It was made for the person who stays. The person who does not filter the directness into something softer before receiving it. The person who can hold the weight of what is being said without needing the weight to be reduced before they can take it in. That person is you, and the staying is the evidence. Now I want to build the bridge between everything said in the first two sections and what this section contains. The bridge is not long. Everything in the first two sections was pointing here. The directness was pointing here. The description of the gap and the mechanism and the channels was pointing here. The most direct message I have ever sent was pointing at the most specific provision I have ever offered. And the provision is what this section names. I want to name you before I name the provision. Because the provision was not assembled in the abstract. It was built for a specific kind of person. You who have known across a long season that the version of yourself showing up was not the version that was designed. You who have had the clarity in glimpses but not in consistency. You who have carried the weight long enough that the carrying became familiar, and the familiarity made it harder to imagine the weight not being there. You who have tried things before that addressed the surface and not the mechanism. That is who this provision was built for. And that is you. I also want to name Ellie, because Ellie came to this provision from exactly the description I just gave. She had been carrying the gap between design capacity and expressed capacity for long enough that she had stopped expecting the gap to close. She had adjusted her expectations of herself downward to match the output the reduced integration was producing. She arrived at this provision not in triumph but in exhaustion, and what she found was not what she expected to find. She expected something that would help her manage better. What she received was something that changed the default, not over months, not across a long and difficult season of work. The integration mechanism, once properly engaged, began producing different outputs almost immediately. The clarity she had been glimpsing came and stayed. The presence she had been partially offering became full. The gap between the version she was living as and the version she was designed to be began to close. Ellie reported that the closing felt like coming home. I want to name the science one more time, because the directness of this message extends to the science. In 1981, Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize for documenting what happens in the human mind when the two hemispheres operate as a fully integrated system. What he documented was not a theory, it was an observed and measured difference in output quality across every function the brain produces. The whole brain integrated state is not a metaphor. It is a documented phenomenon with documented outputs, and the provision being offered in this message is the applied implementation of that documentation. I want to address the most common form of resistance that arises at this point, the resistance that says, something this specific, cannot also address something this broad, cannot reach into every dimension of function and change the baseline. That resistance has a logical structure, and I respect the logic. Here is the direct response. The brain governs everything. When the integration of the brain is changed, everything the brain governs is changed. The scope of the effect is determined by the scope of the mechanism, and the mechanism is everything. The provision that engages the mechanism is called the genius switch. It was built by Dr. Daniel Barone, who spent years developing the specific application of the documented research from Sperry into a form that ordinary people in ordinary lives could access and use. Not a laboratory tool, not a clinical intervention requiring a medical context. An audio program, delivered through the auditory pathway, which is the most direct pathway into the integration mechanism that the research identified. The format is the function. The audio is not a delivery method chosen for convenience. It is the specific channel through which the mechanism is most effectively engaged. Let me show you something. I want you to see what the direct address produces. It is 2 weeks from this moment. The provision has been working for 14 days. You are standing in a situation that used to be one of the ones where the dimmed switch was most visible. A moment requiring full engagement, full clarity, full presence. The kind of moment where you have historically felt yourself slightly behind yourself, slightly less than fully there, but you are not behind yourself today. The version that shows up for this moment is the version that was designed to show up for it. The routing has changed. The channels are no longer running around the weight. They are running through the design, and the design is exactly what this moment needed. You do not perform your way through the moment. You inhabit it. There is no gap between who is present and who was meant to be present. The clarity arrives without being forced. The words come without being pulled. The presence you offer is the full amount. That version of you is not a different person. There are two versions. The one who inhabits that moment without the gap, and the one reading these words right now who knows the gap intimately. The distance between the two is the dimmed switch addressed. That is all. 8 minutes a day for 14 days, and the switch shifts. The investment for the Genius Switch is $39. I want to name that number directly the way this entire message has named things directly. $39 stands between you and the provision. That is the directness of the offer. The original price was $49. The current access point is $39. And what is available for $39 is the complete implementation of Nobel Prize documented brain integration research in a form that you can use starting today. The number is named. The directness does not hide it. When you receive the Genius Switch, you receive 4 additional elements alongside the core program. The Quick Start Guide gives you the fastest pathway to engaging the mechanism from your first session. The Brain Balance Blueprint explains the architecture of what the program is doing in language designed for people who are not researchers. The Focus Flow Protocol applies the same integration principles to specific high-demand situations where the full capacity is most needed, and lifetime access to updates means the provision continues to grow with the research rather than being fixed at this moment. The provision comes with a 60-day guarantee. The complete $39 is returned if within 60 days the mechanism has not produced the outputs that the science behind it promises. Not a conditional return, not a partial one, the full amount. The guarantee is the expression of the certainty behind the provision. Dr. Barone built the program with enough confidence in the mechanism to put the full investment behind that confidence. The guarantee holds. I want to name one more thing that the directness of this message requires me to name. There are versions of what appears to be this provision available through channels that are not the authorized pathway. The mechanism is precise. A version of the program that does not come through the authorized pathway does not carry the implementation that engages the mechanism properly. It may carry the appearance. It does not carry the function. The authorized pathway is the link in the description. The link in the description is where the full, functioning implementation is available. Use that link. I want to speak about what changes in a life when the directness of the provision is matched by the directness of the reception, because both sides of this matter. The provision was built with directness. It does not ask the mechanism to change gradually over time through sustained effort. It engages the mechanism directly through the specific auditory pathway that the research identified, and the mechanism responds to the direct engagement. When the reception matches that directness, when you go to the link and engage the program with the intention of receiving what it was built to deliver, the outputs come with a speed that surprises most people. The surprise is not because the mechanism is mysterious. The surprise is because most approaches to change in this domain work slowly. They layer encouragement and insight over a long period and hope the accumulation tips something. The provision does not work that way. It works directly. It engages the specific mechanism that determines the quality of integration, and the integration responds. The speed is built into the mechanism, not into the person. You do not need to be especially receptive or especially prepared. The mechanism responds to direct engagement regardless of the state the person arrives in. I want to name what the most direct action you can take right now looks like. Not the action of deciding whether the provision is worth exploring, not the action of researching whether the mechanism is real. Those decisions were made for you by Dr. Roger Sperry in 1981, and by every researcher who built on that foundation since. The most direct action you can take right now is to go to the link in the description and enter the pathway to the provision. That is, the action. And the action is available to you in this moment, while the directness is still fully present in you. I also want to name what you will carry with you from this message if you go to the link. You will carry the understanding of what the mechanism is. You will carry the knowledge that the gap between your current expressed capacity and your designed capacity is not permanent. You will carry the specific pathway to the provision that addresses the mechanism. And you will carry the certainty that the most direct message I have ever sent you was sent because what was being pointed to was worth the directness. None of that changes if you wait, but the window changes if you wait. And the window is the only variable in this equation. I want to close this section with the most direct statement I have made in this entire message. And the entire message has been direct. The gap between the version of you that is currently operating and the version of you that was designed to operate is addressable. The mechanism for addressing it is documented. The provision that engages the mechanism is available. The pathway to the provision is the link in the description. The investment is $39 with a 60-day guarantee. The directness of this message was pointing at this all along. Now the pointing is done. The provision is named. Go to the link. Chosen one. This is the final section of the most direct message I have ever sent you, and I want to begin this section with something that the rest of the message has been building toward, a direct naming of what is at stake in this moment, not what was at stake in the earlier calls or what might be at stake in future messages. What is at stake right now, in this moment, as you hold everything this message has placed in front of you? What is at stake is the gap between the version of you that is currently operating and the version of you that was designed to operate. That gap has been present across a long season, and the moment you are in right now is the specific moment in which the provision for closing the gap has been named with the most clarity it has ever been named with in any message I have sent. What is at stake is whether this moment of clarity translates into the action that closes the gap, or whether it becomes another impression that arrived and was noted and moved past. I want to speak to the word stake directly, because I am not using it to frighten you. I am using it to name what is actually true about this moment. High stakes does not mean danger. High stakes means significance, and this moment is significant. The most direct message I have ever sent you arriving at the moment of the most specific provision I have ever offered is significant. The significance is the stake. What is at stake is whether significance is received at the level of significance, whether the clarity of this message is received with the clarity of a response. I also want to return to the phrase at the center of this message. Please do not test that today. I want to speak about what the testing would look like and what the alternative to testing looks like. The testing looks like receiving the directness and acknowledging it inwardly, and then allowing the momentum of the ordinary day to carry you past the moment of decision. That is the test, not defiance, not resistance. Just the resumption of the ordinary, the letting of the moment of clarity dissolve back into the ambient noise of the day. That is what I am asking you not to do. The alternative is simpler than the testing. The alternative is the one action, not a series of actions. 1. Go to the link in the description. That is the direct response to the direct message. One action. And the one action opens the door to everything that was described in the sections that came before this one. The restoration of the integration, the closure of the gap, the access to the designed capacity on a consistent rather than occasional basis. All of that is on the other side of the one action, and the one action is available to you right now. I want to speak to the specific quality of this moment, not the moment in general. This specific moment. the moment when the directness of the message is still fully present in you, the moment when the clarity that the message delivered is at its highest. That moment is now, right now, as you are hearing these words, and that moment has a duration. It is not permanent. The momentum of the day reasserts itself. The ambient noise returns. The clarity that was present at its highest gradually reduces back to baseline. The window of this moment is the window I am asking you to act within. The action in the window is small. Not small in what it opens, small in what it requires. A click, a link, a $39 access point with a 60-day guarantee that removes the risk entirely. The provision was made accessible, specifically and deliberately accessible, because the gap between designed capacity and expressed capacity is not a problem that requires a complex or expensive or difficult solution. It requires the correct engagement of the correct mechanism, and the correct engagement is what the provision delivers. I want to speak one final time about what the directness of this message was for. Not what it was for in the sense of its purpose in communication, what it was for in the sense of what it was pointing at. The directness was for you, specifically for the version of you that receives directness and recognizes it as care rather than pressure. The version of you that can hold a message that says, please do not test that today, without needing the message softened before it lands. The version of you that was being prepared across the earlier calls and is present now in full readiness. The directness was for that version, and that version is who is here. Remember what I called this, the direct address. It was never harshness. It was never a withdrawal of care. It was always the highest form of love, choosing the clearest possible form at the moment when clarity was what you needed most. I want to name the pathway one final time, directly. The link is in the description. The link goes to the authorized pathway for the provision. The provision is the audio program built by Dr. Daniel Barone on the foundation of Nobel Prize winning brain integration research. The program engages the whole brain integration mechanism through the auditory pathway. The integration mechanism, once engaged, produces the outputs that reduce the gap between expressed and designed capacity. The investment is $39. The guarantee is 60 days and full return. The bonuses are included. The updates are lifetime access. The pathway is the link. The link is in the description. I want to say something that I have not said in exactly this way at any other point in this message. I believe in what I am pointing you toward, not with the belief that exists without evidence, with the belief that is produced by the alignment between the design of the provision and the design of the person receiving it. I believe in what I am pointing you toward because the mechanism is real and the research is documented and the provision is the correctly built implementation of that research, and the person it was built for is you. The directness of this message is not the expression of urgency for its own sake. It is the expression of the certainty that what is being offered is worth the directness, that the clarity of the offer deserved a message that matched it in clarity, that the significance of the provision deserved a communication that named the significance plainly, that the person receiving it deserved to receive it without layers between the truth of what was being offered and the words being used to offer it. That is why the directness. That is what it was for, and the provision it is pointing at is waiting in the link in the description. I have been more direct with you in this message than I have been in any message before it. The directness was not a style. The directness was the form that this moment required, and I gave it the form it required because you deserve that from me. What I am asking now is that the directness be met with directness in return, not a dramatic response, the simple, direct action of going to the link and accessing the provision. That is the direct response to the direct message, and it is available to you right now before the ambient noise returns. I want to speak about what the direct response to a direct message actually produces, not in this moment specifically, in the pattern of a life. When a person develops the capacity to receive directness and respond to it directly, the quality of every decision in their life changes. Not because the decisions become easier, because the person making them stops inserting layers of delay between the recognition of what is needed and the action that delivers it. The delay is what the gap produces. The design produces response, and the design, properly engaged, closes the gap that was producing the delay. What I am describing is not only the function of the provision I have offered in this message. I am describing what the restoration of the integration does at the level of the person. When the two hemispheres are operating in full integration, the quality of decision-making changes, not because the person becomes more intelligent about individual decisions, because the architecture of how decisions are made is restored to its designed state. The designed state is not one that delays in the face of clarity. It is one that responds to clarity with directness. I want to name one more specific thing that the directness of this message is asking you to understand. The directness is asking you to understand the difference between receiving a message and responding to a message. These are different things. Receiving a message means taking in what was said. Responding to a message means acting from what was received. Most people who have stayed through this entire message have received it. The receiving is evident in the staying. What the directness is asking for now is the response. The response that follows from the receiving. The action that the reception points toward. The reception pointed toward one action, the link in the description, and the action is the response that closes the loop between what was sent and what was received. A loop that was opened at the beginning of this message with the phrase, "I have never been more direct with you than I am being right now." The loop closes when the action is taken. The action is available. The loop is waiting to be closed, and the closing is the direct response to the direct message. This is the moment for it. I want to also speak about what happens in the life of the person who responds directly to this direct message, not in the abstract sense of what the provision produces, in the specific sense of what the response means for the pattern of the life going forward. The person who responds to clarity with directness builds something in the pattern of their living. They build a different relationship between recognition and action, between seeing what is needed and moving toward it, between the designed capacity, which responds directly, and the expressed capacity, which the gap was making indirect. The response to this message is the first expression of the designed capacity coming through the gap. Not fully, not yet, but the first expression. The one that says the designed capacity is accessible enough to produce a direct response to a direct message. And that first expression is meaningful. It is the beginning of what the provision will expand into a consistent pattern. The one action becomes the evidence that the restoration is underway, and the restoration produces more of its own evidence with every cycle of the mechanism. Go to the link. The designed capacity is ready to meet you there. The most direct I have ever been, the most specific I have ever offered, the most prepared you have ever been to receive, and the link is in the description. Go now. This is the message. This is the provision. This is the moment. The directness has said everything it was sent to say. The only thing left is the one action, and the one action is yours.